Punch it, Chewie! Welcome to Pegwarmers. I'm Kevin, and I'm here to talk about Star Wars ships for 3 3/4-inch action figures. Today's episode is not going to be a full review of every single vehicle from the Kenner or Hasbro era. I'm talking about the vehicles I had, or a few that I didn't have. I do want to apologize off the bat. My dog is crated upstairs, and the neighbors are taking down their Christmas decorations, and the activity outside is making him a little crazy. So if you hear a bark or a crate door jiggle, everything's okay. In the first year of the Kenner Star Wars line, there were 4 main ships. So like I said, I'm not talking about land speeders and sand crawlers and other vehicles like that, just the spaceships. We had the Millennium Falcon, the TIE Fighter, the X-Wing, and Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. Growing up as a kid, I missed the ultimate time to be a Star Wars fan. I was born in 1982, so I was left over growing up with the dribs and drabs that were in stores and mostly yard sale finds when it came to Star Wars. So I did not have any brand new, out-of-the-package Star Wars figures and vehicles growing up as a kid. I bought one Star Wars mini rig in a beat-up box years after it should have been off the store shelves, missing parts. It of course was missing parts. The X-Wing and the TIE Fighter for this series were molded in a white plastic. I do not have the TIE Fighter. This is probably one of the most desired Kenner vehicles for me. I do have the original X-Wing. I got mine by trading a Ghostbusters Ecto-1 for it when I was in probably middle school. And I didn't really care about Ghostbuster stuff anymore, and I was dying to get all of the Kenner Star Wars things. So I traded my childhood Ecto-1 and its box to a lady at a vintage toy shop for a X-Wing in pretty good shape. Growing up, I didn't know anybody that had Darth Vader's TIE Fighter, but it is just the body of the regular TIE Fighter with those special bent fin. I bought one of those many years later as an adult collector and have that in my collection. The Millennium Falcon was the crown jewel of the Kenner Star Wars line. Half spaceship, half playset, all fun. Growing up as a kid, my best friend Derek had the shell of one with just the back panel so you could enclose the ship. It didn't have the cockpit screen, it didn't have the gunner seat. It may have had the ramp without the struts. His uncle gave it to him, and we played with that all the time. I eventually bought my own that was missing just the Jedi practice ball, probably in my early teens. It actually came with a Return of the Jedi box that's just above where I sit, just out of frame of the shot. I later bought a second complete Millennium Falcon, this time actually complete, and took the Jedi ball from that one and put it with mine. I think my first Falcon was also missing the chest table. So when I had the opportunity to buy a actually complete one, I took the Jedi ball and the chest table, put it into the Millennium Falcon that I had owned for a long time, kept it with the box I had, and sold the other Falcon. I think I actually traded it for some store credit to a different toy vendor many years later. So growing up as a kid, not having a lot of these ships, I often used Constructs, a building toy, to make an X-Wing stand-in. I sometimes used the G.I. Joe Conquest. I used the Destro APG, the anti-gravity pod from the Iron Grenadiers, as my TIE Fighter. I just kind of had to get creative with a lot of these vehicles that I didn't have as a kid. I had to bring this along. I actually rebuilt this when Mike was talking to me about Constructs, because this was my favorite thing I ever built out of Constructs. I never had the vintage Kenner X-Wing fighter, and so But these are vintage Kenner figures. Correct. This is the Luke X-Wing pilot and the original R2-D2 figure, and they're beat up. These were played with by me as a kid. And I actually built 2 of these for myself and one at my friend's house, because he didn't have an X-Wing either. And so we had this fleet of Constructs X-Wing fighters. For Empire Strikes Back, Kenner released the battle-damaged X-Wing. This was basically the same X-Wing in a light gray plastic, and this time it came with a sticker sheet that you could apply once and done battle damage to your X-Wing. Kind of a cheesy feature, but a way to repackage this toy and sell it again, a refresh if you will. I just recently got mine. I bought it at RetroCon, I think. Yeah, pretty sure I bought it at RetroCon this year. The wings don't stay open quite as nice as I would like. When you press it, they open, but they do droop a little bit. I'm not sure if there's a way to fix that. I may also just cut a small, shim out of wood and paint it gray and just stick it in there to hold the wings open while it's on display so it looks nice. Empire Strikes Back also released the Twin Cloud Car. This was sort of the ship every kid had from that era. It was the right price point that parents could easily buy this for a birthday or Christmas present. My buddy Derek had one of these, I think missing both canopies, but we played with it a fair amount. And I eventually bought a complete one for my own collection. I'm actually displaying a lot of my ships hanging from the ceiling. And this one, I'm not sure if I'm going to hang with those other ones, because this isn't really a starfighter, but it's not a ground vehicle either. It's not like a speeder or a skimmer, so that's why it's in this video. The Cloud Car is a rusty orange plastic, 2 pods connected in the center. It's got 2 glass canopies built into the hatches there, or clear plastic canopies built into hatches. It has landing gear that can drop down. It doesn't do a whole lot. It doesn't have a lot of play features. And what kid had 2 Cloud Car pilots to man this thing? Next up is Slave One. This was, a legendary ship, and always a toy that was very expensive, kind of like the Millennium Falcon when I was a kid growing up. You'd see them occasionally missing the side panel, almost always missing the Han Solo and Carbonite. Those were usually sold by secondhand toy dealers as its own figure, like it'd be in a display case with the rare stuff, not being sold with the beat-up, missing part Slave One that they had. I bought a Slave One as an adult collector. I love having it in my collection. Many people of my generation had the Power of the Force 2 Slave One, and I just never pulled the trigger on that one for some reason. The biggest new ship to come out for Empire Strikes Back was the Rebel Transport. This is actually a figure carrying case shaped like a spaceship. It has a couple of panels that can be removed for a little bit of play action. There's a cockpit area, there's a gunner station in the back, but mostly it just holds figures inside. I never had this as a kid. I know that if Derek and I had this, we would have played with it all the time, and we probably would have come up with much more important things for it to do. I'm kind of surprised they never made a Star Destroyer about this size, or, approximately like this. They did do a Darth Vader's Star Destroyer playset, which I'm not covering in this video, but that is really a playset, and not, like, the shape of the ship. I just know that whatever we had got used a lot, and we often made things more important than maybe it was originally intended. Some of the side characters became really important in our Star Wars stories because we were making up our own adventures. Having seen the 3 movies, we knew what happened, so we were often either playing somewhere between Empire and Jedi, or we were playing post-Jedi era adventures, and so, different ships and different characters would have different levels of importance. The Rebel Transport is just sort of a large, off-white, cucumber-shaped ship. Like I mentioned before, I am trying to display my Star Wars ships hanging from the ceiling. I'm not hanging the Millennium Falcon, I'm not hanging the Troop Transport here, and probably not Slave One. Some of those bigger ships, I want to try and find a way to display where you can look at them better. Hanging from the ceiling is a great solution to save space, but it does obscure what parts you can view or what parts you can have access to. So I'm not hanging everything. My system for hanging the ships, I've been using this clear twist tie type material. It's by Weststone. I got this off of Amazon. It doesn't have a great name on here, but I'll see if I can find it online and put a link in the description down below. I'm also using hooks I bought from Amazon. They have like a little carabiner type clip, so when I hook a fishing line or twist tie over it, they kind of click in there, and I don't have to worry about them getting knocked off by accident. If somebody walked down the basement, didn't really know the ships were there, and accidentally bumped into them or backed into them. Trying to do what I can to protect them while they're elevated. I actually took some video while I was hanging some of the ships. You can see I'm pre-drilling into wood beams and then screwing in the hooks. It takes a little bit of fiddling to come up with a scheme for the wire for hanging them. You kind of need to connect at 2 or 3 points depending on the center of gravity of the ship. Try not to have any of them like dipping all the way down or hanging upside down. But I'm trying to give a little bit of sense of motion to the ships. So I do have some of them hanging, banking to one direction or another a little bit to look like they're in a dogfight. The one section has a Power of the Force 2 TIE Fighter and Darth Vader's vintage TIE Fighter chasing the vintage X-Wing. On the other side, I have a modern TIE bomber chasing a modern Y-Wing with a vintage B-Wing swooping in to try and save the day. Most recently, on top of that part of the dogfight, I've added in some more ships. More recently, I added in the vintage battle-damaged TIE Fighter and the battle-damaged X-Wing. I'm also hoping to hang up a few more ships in that. You'll see some throughout the video. Return of the Jedi saw a lot more ships. Kenner really pushed new vehicles for that movie. Many vehicles that we had already seen throughout the trilogies that just never got vehicles. We got the battle-damaged TIE Fighter, as I mentioned. This is a dark blue plastic. It comes with the stickers for the solar fins, but then battle-damaged stickers you could place on there. It's just a remold of the original ship. It's got that same center body as the Darth Vader TIE Fighter in a fairly similar color. The B-Wing, a pretty massive ship. There's not a lot going on with it that you can do as far as the figures go. One goes in the cockpit, and then there is a thruster on the back you can turn to spread open the wings, the attack foils. It does have landing gear. The coolest thing about it is that no matter which way you hold the ship, the gunner cockpit thing always self-levels. I had the cockpit, the interior part of the cockpit to this for a long time, not knowing what it was, until I got a B-Wing. You know, it came in like a lot of junk from a yard sale one time. So I bought a B-Wing from I think the same collector yard sale maybe that I got the Rebel Transport, but I could be wrong. The Rebel Transport might actually be from a toy show, and the B-Wing was from that yard sale. I'm a little rusty on some of these, when I bought them, where I bought them. But I had a B-Wing for a while. It was a little bit beat up, and then I had the opportunity to buy a really nice one. And I sold the beat up one that I had at a toy show, actually one of the Raiders of the Lost Toys toy shows, you know, for what I thought was a pretty good price. I think I actually tried to sell it before I moved, and nobody bit, so then I sold it at one of those toy shows. The B-Wing I never saw as a kid, you know, growing up in that era, post the movies. I never saw like a shell to one at toy stores. Like I would constantly, every comic book store had a Castle Grayskull and a Millennium Falcon shell. I never saw the B-Wing. The Imperial Shuttle is one of the most impressive vehicles, even though it should really be way bigger than it is. The fact that they made it and the size it is phenomenal. I wanted this so bad as a kid. I think my buddy Derek and I would have had so many fun adventures with it, because we really used Vader and the Emperor and the Imperial Dignitary as very important characters in our Star Wars stories. Anything that we did pre-Return of the Jedi or alternate Return of the Jedi storylines. And we would have used the Imperial Shuttle like crazy. It would have been in dogfights with the Millennium Falcon all the time, and it would have been flying Vader from place to place. It's a really cool ship. I bought it as an adult after I bought my house one summer. I think it was just kind of like my gift to myself. I worked all summer. I'm a teacher, so I have summers off normally, but when I was young, I worked every summer in addition to teaching. And so I think at the end of the one summer, I just decided that was going to be kind of my fun thing to reward myself with some of the money that I'd earned over the summer. So I ordered it off eBay. It came in a big box, and I've loved it ever since then. Right now, it's landing, currently sitting on the General. It's been there ever since I moved into this house, while I'm still trying to figure out how I'm displaying some of the bigger pieces. The TIE Interceptor, a really cool vehicle that I never really saw in the movies. I know they're there, and I've seen them more like with slow motion stuff. I don't think they varied the design of the TIE enough to make it obvious that that's what it is in the movie. They just zip by too fast in these giant space battles. But really cool looking vehicle. I do not have a vintage TIE Interceptor. That's up there with the regular TIE, the vintage white TIE, as the vintage vehicles I would like to get the most, probably. The last vehicle from the Return of the Jedi line would be the Y-Wing. This was a ship I got to play with a lot as a kid. My buddy Derek had one that was complete, was in great shape. I loved you could put a droid in the back, you could put a pilot in the front. We played with it all the time. I do not own a vintage Y-Wing. I've had the opportunity to buy one several times, usually missing parts, and it's just not worth buying it without the struts for the back engine supports. I do have two more modern versions of it, so they are stand-ins for now at least. The last main ship from the original trilogy to be made by Kenner was the A-Wing fighter. It was released during the Droid series. It's outrageously expensive. I've seen one in real life once or twice in my entire life. I don't expect to ever own one of those, but they're really cool. In 1995, Hasbro came out with the Power of the Force line. Kenner Hasbro Kind of a combo here. Awesome toy line. Starts off a little funny, using remolds of the vintage vehicles with super bulked out action figures. Eventually it finds its way. I wish I had bought more of those vehicles, honestly, the Power of the Force vehicles when they came out. But I was a kid. I was still in, like, middle school. I was collecting the figures pretty rapidly, especially anybody who had not been a vintage Kenner figure or was like a Last 17 figure that I never had. So guys like Yak Face, General Lando, a lot of the Cantina guys, I just loved that they were making them. And I just thought some of the figures were just a lot of fun. The Luke X-Wing figure, he was technically in his Hoth gear. He had like the brown gloves. I thought that was a cool figure. Just a lot of fun to play with. Eventually, like Bespin Luke that had the removable hand. I just really loved the Power of the Force line. And I know some of the stuff is really goofy from it, but I had a ton of fun with it in my basically teenage years. And so I bought a lot of vehicles from it. I couldn't afford to buy them all. And I kind of skipped them all at the very beginning, or mostly all of them at the very beginning. But eventually, as I got older and became an adult, was able to snag a lot more of them. The first vehicle from that line that I want to talk about is Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. This was not a retool of the Kenner one. Now, maybe the fins were, but the body is different, and the body is more screen accurate. The regular vintage version just uses the TIE Fighter front, so it doesn't have any of this back area, the big kind of half-circle area behind the cockpit, which makes this one really neat. And it makes me want to keep this one, even though it's a duplicate vehicle of a unique vehicle, and I'm going back and forth. I'm trying to get these ships up and on the ceiling and off the floor, trying to get as many of them on display. Do I need 2 Darth Vader TIE Fighters hanging? I would rather have the vintage one on display than this one, but this one is more screen accurate, and it makes it kind of cool. So I'm on the fence whether I'm going to get rid of this ship, which I've had for a long time, but I didn't get it as a kid. I bought this at a yard sale. It's really cool. I really like it. It's much more screen accurate. In the comments down below, let me know what you think of this. Should I keep 2 Darth Vader TIE Fighters, or is the real estate just too precious down here? I could hang more and other things up if I don't display this. Luke's T-16 Skyhopper, an interesting toy. Cool that they finally made a toy of this thing, but we never really saw it in the movie. It really is a shame that there was not a scene of him flying that in Beggar's Canyon. I think that's kind of such a huge missed opportunity. He does play with the little model of it, but I didn't buy it because I didn't really see a use for it. When I played Star Wars, I didn't do a lot on Tatooine. Like, he's just getting out of there right away. The cantina scene, that kind of stuff, a little bit more, but he doesn't really... He doesn't have an adventure. There's nothing for him to do with the Skyhop. So I didn't buy it. I still don't own it, but it's kind of a fun vehicle. Sort of triangular. Does remind me a little bit of the Imperial shuttle, mostly because of that tall fin on the top. The TIE Fighter from this line is basically a reissue of the original one with some molded details for the solar fins this time instead of stickers. I have that one. It is the only vehicle from the original Power of the Force release that I got as a kid. I was super excited to get a TIE Fighter, so I had a TIE Fighter that wasn't just the APG that I was using as a kid, and I used to just set it on top of the Kenner Death Star playset on display as a young adult collector. There were 2 versions of Luke's X-Wing for Power of the Force 2, an electronic version that was scaled up, and then a re-release of his vintage X-Wing. I don't own the scaled up one, but I do have 2 of the smaller Luke Skywalker X-Wings. I do think these are a lot of fun because it is the vintage one, but with nicer stickers and nicer paint job to it. I actually did a short about this. I have versions of it that I bought both at yard sales, and the one is missing all of the lines on the fins. This is Red 5. That one, though, isn't Red Leader, which I think I might have mentioned in the short, because Red Leader would just have 1 stripe. I don't know what that ship is technical designation is, and I don't know if the person who put it together did it on purpose, leaving the stripes off, or just screwed up. I am thinking about displaying this one hanging from the ceiling to bolster the number of X-Wings in that scene. I need to get a pilot to stick in here, and I would love to find another set of guns. I actually have a couple of these extra guns somewhere for the X-Wing. I do not know how to tell whether they are vintage or Power of the Force 2. That's something I should probably research. Maybe they're indistinguishable, too. The ones that I picked up in a baggie, I don't honestly know whether someone was collecting them to build out these ones or build out the other ones or transport some. I don't really know where they came from. I've just had a baggie of them in my collection for a while. They also did a reissue of the Millennium Falcon. It looks great with the updated paint scheme, but it is way too small for the bulkier figures. It's silly, but it was really neat that they put that back in stores. I did not get it as a kid because I think I already had the vintage one. Shadows of the Empire was a small subline released around the same time. It just felt like a subline of Power of the Force, and they re-released Slave 1. It's really cool. I thought about getting it. I might have even asked for it for Christmas one year, but never got it. The other ship released for that line was Dash Rendar's Outrider. It's sort of a Millennium Falcon ripoff. It looks like a B-Wing and a Millennium Falcon sort of combined together. I never thought it was that interesting. I hadn't read Shadows of the Empire when the toys were out. I did read the book later. I went through a huge phase somewhere in this time period of reading a lot of the Expanded Universe novels. But I was not a huge fan of Dash Rendar or that ship in that moment yet, so I never got it. I've thought about getting it. I've actually talked about doing an episode all about the Shadows of the Empire merchandising and promotional push that Hasbro and Lucasfilm did. So I do kind of need to keep an eye out for that if I ever want to make that video. After Shadows of the Empire, Power of the Force continued on. They released a Y-Wing in yellow colors and an A-Wing. I was super excited to get this A-Wing. It is a small off-white ship with red stripe or maroon stripe down the center of it. The paint job on this is so good, and I think probably the first Power of the Force vehicle that I had besides the TIE Fighter. And the TIE Fighter doesn't have as much of the splatter aging look to it. One, it's a dark color, and two, the Empire stuff is in better shape than the Rebel stuff. So this paint job really blew me away and kind of made me start to regret not getting some of those other ships. I think a lot of the other ships, though, I passed on because I just wanted to get the vintage versions. And this one I knew was pretty much unattainable. And this is a fantastic little ship. It came with an A-Wing pilot, and I loved it as a kid. I played with it quite a bit, and used to have Luke go on adventures in it sometimes as well, because it's like a little quick, small ship. Also, the A-Wing pilot, though, would come and save the day a lot. And this one, I'm getting ready to figure out how to hang and find the center of gravity on this thing. I'm thinking wire from gun to gun, and then maybe something off the back booster to help balance it out. Definitely the back end is heavier, so I just kind of have to see. I'll put that first loop on and see how it hangs, and then decide if it needs something else. I did play with the landing gear the other day. It is really tight. I don't know if the spring is just kind of dying on this thing, like it's been stretched for too long. It does not. The landing gear can be made to do its thing, but woo, it is tough. I don't know if the spring has been compressed or stretched or something for far too long. That the landing gear just does not like to work real well. I don't remember it being this hard to operate as a kid. The line eventually shifted to Power of the Jedi. There were more vehicles in this era. There was a B-Wing, which I didn't have. The TIE Bomber, which I did have and am displaying. That was really cool. One of the reasons I went for that was it was never released as a vintage vehicle. And my buddy Derek and I used to talk about how cool it would be to have a TIE Bomber vehicle, just because we loved the variety of ships in Star Wars. There was also an updated version of the TIE Interceptor. Eventually the line would then be changed to the Saga Collection. There was an A-Wing repaint for that line that was green and really grungy and super cool. I would love to get my hands on that ship. A re-release of the Imperial Shuttle. Another release of a scaled-up Luke's X-Wing. I don't know if it was the same X-Wing as Luke's electronic X-Wing from the Power of the Force 2 line with the permanent pilot removed and modified to then make the figures work with it, but, using that scaled-up size. I'm a little unclear on that, but this was a more appropriately scaled vehicle. The Kenner vehicles were all really small, made for kids to play with and to be inexpensive. And now as collectors were influencing the line, and they got away from the bulky power superhero versions of the Star Wars guys and into more movie-accurate stuff, they started scaling up some of the ships a little bit more. There was a release of that same X-Wing as Red Leader's X-Wing. The TIE Bomber got a repaint, and the TIE Fighter got a repaint. I bought lots of figures from this era, but not a lot of vehicles. Again, this is like college age now. In the early 2000s, I didn't have the money to be buying vehicles. The Saga Collection, as it was now called, from 2006 to 2007, was sort of an era where I could finally start spending a little bit of money. I was out of college, I had a job, obviously I was saving up for, adult responsibilities, but I also had an adult paycheck for the first time in my life, so I was able to get some of the more fun stuff. I got the TIE Fighter with the scaled up wings. This thing is pretty enormous. The pod, the body part, is the same size as the vintage X-Wing, that early Kenner Power of the Force 2 X-Wing, but the wings are scaled up to be much larger. I love having X-Wings on display in this dogfight scene I'm making, but because the fins are so big, they really are going to interfere with people walking under it, so I am thinking about parting with this one. I also had the repaint of this in sort of like a off-white color, but it was always missing a hatch, or maybe both halves of the hatch. I bought it at a yard sale one time, hoping to find another one that I could fix it up with. I parted with that one already, and I'm thinking about parting with this one also, just because of the space commitment. I want to peek in here. I think this came with a pilot. Well, if it did, it's not in there. Oh well. He's probably with the rest of my Imperial troops. All these TIE Fighters have, blow-away wings. You can push a button, and the fins fall off to, simulate them getting shot down, which is a fun feature for kids. That year, I also got the upscaled X-Wing Fighter. This is from a Dagobah-themed set. It came with swamp gunk you could stick on this. It came with a little underwater sea snake monster and a Dagobah Luke who could do the handstand pose. Again, I think this might be that scaled-up vehicle from the electronic Power of the Force 2 release, but modified so now you can put guys in. I think this was the same ship released for Luke a couple different times and for the trench run with Red Leader, but I'm not 100% positive. Without R2, like on the Kenner ones to put the wings up and down, oh, there's a knob on the back here. So there's a little tab on the back of the ship to put the S-foils out and lock them in combat. I am thinking about hanging this one from the ceiling. It's silly, right? Because this is upscaled and doesn't fit with the other ones. But I really like the way this one looks, so I am thinking about keeping this one, even though I'm thinking about getting rid of the TIE Fighter. Again, in the comments down below, give me your input. What are your thoughts? Am I crazy for getting rid of some of this stuff? Is it a good idea to scale down? I have so much Star Wars stuff. I was such a huge Star Wars fan, and I have prequel stuff. I want to be able to display it. I will never get rid of the Kenner stuff, but some of the Hasbro stuff I just think I have maybe too much of. So I'm trying to find that balance. For the 30th anniversary collection, they came out with the Elite TIE Interceptor. This was the first TIE Interceptor to ever be in my collection. It's got a cool paint scheme with this red racing stripe. It's not the most generic TIE Interceptor ever. You can see I'm working on setting this one up to hang from the ceiling. I'm using a 3-pronged approach here. The Interceptor's fins are so heavy it wanted to tilt forward all the time. So my regular TIE Fighter setup with a wire going to each fin up to a center point wasn't holding it up. So I added this third piece here that helps kind of pull up on the front of the ship to help it display well. There was also a yellow Y-Wing released that year. I don't think that's the yellow Y-Wing I have hanging from my ceiling, but it could be. Then the Legacy Collection in 2008 2009. Probably the last Star Wars vehicle I may have gotten. I had really calmed down on buying the Star Wars stuff. I had most of the vehicles that I really wanted. My mom got me the big Millennium Falcon. Some of you guys know that have watched the show for a long time. This cardboard box that people comment on sometimes, why you got a plain cardboard box back there? That is a sealed in the shipper box big Millennium Falcon. I don't know how many of those exist in the world, but that one's mine. That's how it was shipped from Amazon to my mom, and that's how it's been ever since I got it. I didn't have a place to display it when I lived with her. It was stored like that in the basement, actually on top of the oil tank. And then when I moved out, shortly after that, it got moved to my house and got put in a closet while I was renovating parts of the house and trying to figure out where my toy room was going to go. And I just never found a spot for it, so I never cracked it open. And now I feel bad considering cutting the tape. So this was my experience with Star Wars spaceships. I love the ships. I have prequel ships. I have a few Disney-era ships, not a lot, but a couple. And again, I'm trying to decide what else I'm going to hang up. I may come back and do an episode like this about the prequels, ships, or vehicles that I have in my collection. Unsure. We'll see how this video goes. If you guys are interested, you can always let me know in the comments if you like this kind of content. It's less of a review and more of just my personal experience with these vehicles. It's almost like setting up the toy room video too, because I was talking about how I'm hanging them up and trying to make this fight. I actually have gaps in it that are sort of like walkways. There's sort of a flow to the toy room as of the way it's currently set up. And so there's like a break between like sections of the ship, so that way you can walk through and not bump into things or have to kind of keep your eyes out for the ships all the time. What's your favorite Star Wars vehicle? In the comments down below, let me know if you have any great memories of opening up one of these things for your birthday or Christmas morning. I'd love to hear about it. Do me a favor, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Share this video with a toy collecting friend. If you want to support the channel further, you can consider joining us on Patreon. Thanks for hanging on the peg with me.